Imagine standing on a shoreline where the ocean has gone silent. No fish, no movement, just dark, still water stretching into the distance. Now look up. The sun isn't there anymore. Not because it's night, but because something has blocked it out. Dust fills the sky. Forests are burning across the planet. The air is turning toxic. This sounds like the end of the world, but it's not fiction, because long before humans existed, Earth has already been pushed to the edge, again and again. Entire ecosystems collapsed, oceans died, up to 90% of life vanished. And the strangest part is this, right before each collapse, everything looked completely normal. In this video, we're going through the 5 times life on Earth was nearly erased, a countdown from 5 to the most devastating event in the planet's history. And with each step, it gets worse. If you're into stories like this, the hidden moments that shaped everything we see today, consider subscribing, because the deeper you look at this planet, the less stable it starts to feel. Let's start with a world that didn't even have land animals yet, a world ruled entirely by the ocean. Around 444 million years ago, Earth looked nothing like it does today. There were no forests, no animals on land, no birds, no mammals. Almost all life existed in the ocean, and those oceans were full. Strange creatures moved across the seafloor. Trilobites crawled in massive numbers. Early fish drifted through warm, shallow seas. Everything seemed stable. Sea levels were high, temperatures were mild. Life was spreading and diversifying. If you were observing from above, you'd see a planet that was thriving, but beneath that calm surface, something slow and massive was happening. A supercontinent known as Gondwana was drifting toward the South Pole. At first, the shift was almost invisible, but as it moved further south, temperatures began to fall. Ice started forming, then spreading. Glaciers expanded across huge parts of the planet, and as more water became trapped in ice, sea levels dropped. Not a little, dramatically. Shallow seas began to disappear, and that was a problem. Because most life depended on those shallow environments. Entire ecosystems were suddenly exposed or simply gone. Creatures that had nowhere else to go started dying off. But the real collapse came after, because eventually the planet warmed again. The ice melted, water returned to the oceans, but something had changed. The oceans lost oxygen. Large areas became what scientists call dead zones, places where most life simply cannot survive. And one by one, entire groups vanished. By the time it was over, around 85% of all species were gone. Not because of a single explosion, but because the environment shifted just enough to break everything. And yet, life didn't end. It adapted. It returned. But the world it came back to was completely different. And the next time this happened, the cause would be even more unexpected. Because it wouldn't start with ice. It would start with something growing: forests. By the time we reach the late Devonian period, life has changed dramatically. The oceans are still full, but now something new is happening on land. Plants have begun to spread. Not small patches, not simple moss, but real forests. Tall, dense vegetation covering large parts of the planet. At first, this looks like progress. More plants mean more oxygen, more stability, a richer environment. It feels like Earth is becoming more alive. But here's the assumption people often make. More life on land must be good for life everywhere else. And for a while, it was. But slowly, that balance began to shift. Because these new forests were doing something powerful. They were pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they were doing it at scale. CO2 levels dropped, temperatures began to fall, the climate cooled. But that wasn't the only effect. As roots broke down rock and soil, nutrients were released. Rain carried those nutrients into rivers, and eventually into the oceans. And that's where things started to collapse, because those nutrients fed massive blooms of algae. At first, it didn't seem dangerous, but as algae spread, they consumed oxygen in the water, and when they died, they sank and decomposed, using up even more oxygen. The oceans began to suffocate. Entire regions turned into dead zones. Fish couldn't breathe. Marine ecosystems started breaking apart. Reefs collapsed. Food chains failed. And this didn't happen all at once. It came in waves. multiple extinction pulses over millions of years, each one pushing life further toward collapse. By the end of it, around 75% of species were gone, and all of it can be traced back to something that seemed harmless: plants. Forests didn't attack anything, they didn't explode, they didn't poison the air directly, they simply changed the system just enough to make it unstable, and that's what makes this event so unsettling. Because nothing violent had to happen for everything to start dying. But even this was nothing compared to what came next. Because the third event would not be slow. It would turn the entire planet into something close to uninhabitable. By the time we reach the end of the Permian period, life is everywhere. On land, ecosystems are complex and diverse. Early reptiles move across vast dry continents. In the oceans, countless species fill every layer of the water. The planet feels full, stable, established. If there was ever a moment when Earth looked like it had figured itself out, this was it. And that's what makes what happens next so extreme. Because the common assumption is simple. Once life becomes this widespread, it becomes harder to wipe out. But this event proves the opposite. Because this time, the collapse doesn't come from ice or plants. It comes from deep inside the Earth itself. In what is now Siberia, something massive begins. Volcanic eruptions. Not a single eruption, not even a series, but continuous volcanic activity lasting for hundreds of thousands of years. Lava floods across the land. Vast regions are buried. But the real damage isn't just the lava, it's what gets released into the atmosphere. Huge amounts of carbon dioxide, methane from underground deposits, toxic gases. The planet begins to heat up. Temperatures rise rapidly. Oceans absorb the excess CO2 and become more acidic. At the same time, oxygen levels in the water begin to drop again. But now, everything is happening at once. Heat, acidification, oxygen loss, multiple systems breaking simultaneously. On land, conditions become extreme. Heat waves intensify, ecosystems collapse. In the ocean, entire food chains disappear. Some areas may have even released hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas that can poison both water and air. And this time, life doesn't just decline, it crashes. By the end of the event, around 90% of all species are gone, the largest mass extinction in Earth's history, sometimes called the Great Dying. This isn't just a reset. It's a near erasure. For a long time after, the planet is almost empty. Recovery takes millions of years. And when life finally returns, it doesn't resemble what came before. Entire groups are gone forever. New ones take their place. And slowly, a new world begins to form. But even after something this extreme, the pattern doesn't stop. Because once life starts to recover, it also becomes vulnerable again. And the next collapse will come from the planet breaking apart itself. After the Great Dying, Earth slowly rebuilds itself. Life returns. Not all at once, but gradually. New species begin to fill the empty spaces. Ecosystems start forming again. On land, reptiles diversify and spread. It's a fragile recovery, but it works. Over millions of years, the planet stabilizes. And once again, it starts to feel familiar, balanced. But here's the pattern. Every time Earth seems stable, it's only temporary. Because this time, the problem doesn't come from ice, or forests, or even a single volcanic region. It comes from the planet itself, breaking apart. At this point in time, most of the land on Earth is joined together, forming a supercontinent known as Pangaea, a massive stretch of land surrounded by a global ocean. For a long time, it holds together, but deep below the surface, pressure builds, and eventually, it begins to split. Cracks form across the continent. And from those cracks, lava starts to rise. This triggers enormous volcanic activity. Again, not a single eruption, but widespread continuous events across vast regions. Lava flows, gas releases, atmospheric changes, carbon dioxide levels increase, temperatures rise, the climate becomes unstable. Ecosystems that had only just recovered are pushed to their limits again. On land, many reptile groups begin to disappear. In the oceans, species struggle to adapt to rapid environmental shifts. Food chains weaken, then collapse. And just like before, this doesn't happen instantly. It unfolds over time, but the direction is clear, downward. By the end of this event, a large portion of life is gone again. Not as extreme as the Great Dying, but enough to reshape the entire planet. And from that collapse, something unexpected happens. A new group rises, dinosaurs. With many competitors gone, they spread rapidly. They take over ecosystems across the planet. For millions of years, they dominate. It starts to look like this time, things might last. But if there's one pattern that keeps repeating, it's this. Nothing lasts forever. Because even the most dominant creatures to ever walk the earth were living right before the next collapse. By the time we reach the end of the Cretaceous period, the world feels complete. Dinosaurs dominate the land. Huge marine reptiles move through the oceans. Flying reptiles control the skies. Ecosystems are rich, balanced, stable. If you were standing there, it wouldn't feel like the end of anything. It would feel like the peak. And that's the assumption. When a system becomes this successful, this dominant, it should last. But this time, the collapse doesn't build slowly. It arrives in an instant. Somewhere in space, a massive asteroid has been traveling for millions of years, unnoticed, unaffected, and then it reaches Earth. It strikes what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact is beyond anything humans have ever experienced. A shockwave spreads across the planet. Earthquakes ripple through the crust. Mega tsunamis race across the oceans. And almost immediately, heat from the impact ignites fires across vast regions. Forests burn. But the most devastating effect comes after. Debris is thrown high into the atmosphere. Dust, soot, particles that block sunlight. For months, maybe years, the sky darkens. Temperatures drop. Photosynthesis stops. Plants begin to die. And once plants go, everything that depends on them follows. Herbivores starve. Carnivores lose their prey. Food chains collapse from the bottom up. And this time, there is no slow recovery phase in between. The system breaks quickly. By the end of it, the dinosaurs that once ruled the planet are gone. Not gradually, not replaced over time, but removed. Almost completely. Only a few lineages survive. And from those survivors, a new era begins. One that eventually leads to mammals rising, and much later, to us. If you look at all 5 of these events together, a pattern starts to emerge. None of them look the same. One begins with ice, another with forests, another with volcanoes, another with continents splitting apart, and one with something falling from the sky. Different causes, different speeds, different triggers, but they all lead to the same outcome. A system that seemed stable suddenly isn't. Life doesn't disappear completely. It never has. But each time, it is forced to start over. And each time, the new world that emerges is fundamentally different from the one before. That's the part that's easy to miss. These events didn't just destroy life, they reshaped it. Everything that exists today is here because something else didn't survive. And maybe the most unsettling thought is this. Right now, we're living in a relatively stable moment, a calm period in a very long history of collapse. But history suggests that stability doesn't last forever. If you found this interesting, and you want to explore more hidden patterns like this, make sure to subscribe. Because the more you understand how this planet works, the more you realize it's not as predictable as it seems. And the real question is, if something like this were to happen again, would we even see it coming?